Good morning. I'm going to give two short talks together, both about robots, sort of. The first is about the next few decades, where I'll say less is going to happen than you think. And after that, I'm going to talk about a century or so from now, when more is going to happen than you think. So let's start with less. I got to talk about happiness somehow. Happiness goes up with income, and as we all know, ever since the Industrial Revolution, income's been going up. We've been getting rich for a century or so, and as we get rich, we've been getting happier, and that's great. One of the main ways we've been getting rich is via automation and increasing our reliance on tools and machines. These include obviously farming machines, but in the last few decades we've seen many jobs replaced by ATMs, cashiers have been replaced by machines, travel agents were replaced. These have all been great improvements that have made us happy, that have improved our lives. And all of this has been disruptive, but it's been part of a continuing disruptive we've seen for a century or two. So the world economy actually doubles every 15 years. So in order to double in 15 years, a lot has to change. So every so often we get big chunks of jobs that switch, but so far the economy's been able to adapt to that. So far we've been able to adapt to these changes that come along. Today, we've got a number of big, interesting, dramatic changes. There are interesting ways in which people like Watson was able to beat a game show. I'm not actually seeing anything on the screen up here, by the way, if you want to turn on the screen. Amazon's experimenting with robots to try to manage their warehouses. Driverless cars are something everybody's excited about. We turn on the first video. So this is an exciting, interesting demonstration of basically making a machine that's a lot like an animal, able to run up hills, on mountains, things like that. Can we go to the second video? This is one of the most exciting things that academics have been interested in. There's a thing called deep learning, and there's a program that was able to take 50 different Atari games, and it was able to play at least half of them better than people with no extra preparation. It took all the games exactly from initially, and it's able to learn all these different games. So we've had advances in machine learning, and all of these advances that I've been showing up here have gotten a lot of people excited, and they've gotten people scared. People have been saying, what's happening? Is this about to create a mass disruption and throw lots of people out of work? So we've heard concerns like this actually all the way since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Every few decades, some people have said, look at these things that are happening now that are so different from before. Are we about to just see machines take over wholesale and replace all the jobs all at once? We heard that in 1810s, 1930s, 1960s. When I was a kid in the 1980s, I left graduate school at Chicago to go off to Silicon Valley to work in artificial intelligence because I thought, it's coming now. Look at all these things that are happening. Surely machines are just going to take over everything now. That's what I thought. I was wrong. Around 2000, there was a dot-com boom, and lots of people were saying, oh my goodness, look at the internet. It's going to change everything. And a lot of money went in, a lot of effort. And now again today, we have another big set of concerns. Are robots, machines, suddenly going to take over and change the world? People worry about taking over jobs, dehumanizing, even killing us. Well, this is a time series of robot revenue in the US. Yes, in the last few decades, there's been a boom. More robots have been sold, supposedly, in the last few years than were sold before that. So something's changed a bit. But if you look at the number, it's 1.6 billion. That's a pretty small fraction of the economy. It's not a big deal. but it is a little deal. Let's take a big picture view of innovation. So the Industrial Revolution getting going around 1800. As we've advanced, we've had a faster and faster rate of innovation. We've gotten more and more inventions, but that peaked around 1970 and it's been going down since. So today, the rate of innovation is not an all-time peak. It's lower than the peak because we haven't been inventing as fast as we were a few decades ago, actually. So there's nothing we see in this chart that says something big is happening right now. Let's look at, this is the S&P 500. It's a measure of stocks, and we've broken it down by sectors here. And you can see that the fraction of investment in stocks that are in these different categories has changed over the decades. And there was a tech bubble around 2000, and you can even see that in the middle rectangle, that there was a time around 2000 where a lot of people were looking at the internet and new technologies, and they were saying, this looks big, this could be really big, and they put a lot of investment into the tech area at that time in the expectation that this looks like it could change everything. Well, they were wrong a bit, and it backed off for a while. But even at that time, a lot of kids were going into computer science. It was a boom time for students to major in computer science because they said, looks like something really big is happening. If you go to the end of the chart here, today, there is no boom in investment in tech. The tech sector is about as big as it was 5 years ago. In terms of people investing in stocks, they aren't saying, this looks like it's going to be big, this looks like it'll take over everything. It's more like business as usual. If we look at the percentage of students going into computer science, it's about the same. There's not a big boom now. So my main message right now is, what we're seeing now in terms of interesting demos and innovations in robotics and AI is par for the course. It's what we've seen for centuries of innovations coming along at a moderately steady pace, displacing some jobs, but we've managed to take those people and put them in other jobs, and we've adapted with time. And maybe someday there'll be a big disruption that'll be different. Maybe this time will be different at some point, but not today. If there ever was going to be a time when it looked like it was different, it was back in the dot-com boom, when people said, wow, this looks like it could really be big. But that's not what investors are saying today. Today they're saying business as usual, not a revolution. And that's probably what you're going to see for the next few decades. Business as usual, not a revolution. New technologies come and displace old at about the same rate they've been doing for centuries. That's now. I have a book called The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth. It's coming out in May from Oxford. It's about a future a century or so from now, when we finally have human-level ability robots that are as capable as humans all across the board. We do not have that now, and we aren't remotely near that. In fact, I was an AI researcher. When I ask AI researchers who've been in the field for at least 20 years, how far do you think we've come to human-level abilities in the last 20 years? They say 5 to 10%. So at that rate, it would take 2 to 4 centuries for AI and robotics to reach human-level abilities. But I think there's another path that will reach that sooner than that, within a century or so. And I've written this book to try to analyze the consequences. So I'm an economist primarily, although I have a background in physics and computer science. And I've taken the scenario that a particular kind of robot will show up, and I've tried to analyze the consequences carefully, and I've filled a book through my consequences. So I'm going to start to tell you about a few of those. You, of course, can get the book later on and read more. And I want to warn you, it's weird. So you should expect the next great era after ours to be as different from our era as we are from the farming era of 2,000 or 5,000 years ago, or as different as that is from the foragers of 100,000 years ago. It's that different. The future is that different from today, and you're about to see some details. But first, let's talk about the kind of robotics I'm talking about, called brain emulation. What do you need? You need a lot of cheap computers, even cheaper than what we have today, but we've got a trend line to produce that. You need scanning. What we're going to do is take a real human brain, and we're going to slice off a layer. We're going to look exactly what's where and find spatial and chemical detail. And we're going to slice off another and do it for an entire brain. We're going to do a brain scan. And then we're going to have models computer models of how each cell works, i.e. how it takes input signals and produces output signals. And if we have a careful enough scan that shows what's where, and we have good enough computer models of each part, then we put that all together into a computer. We have a model of the whole brain. The parts of the model are good enough, then the whole model is good enough. The model will have the same input-output behavior as a human brain that we scanned. What does that mean? It reacts the same way to disturbances. So you could talk to it, it would talk back in the same way that the person would have. You could ask it to do a job, and if it knows how to do the job and you ask it nicely, maybe it would do it. That's what a brain emulation is. It's a machine that's a copy of a human brain so that it acts like the human brain. And if you have those cheap, everything changes. So now you have clearly something that's as capable as a human, and it can do all the jobs humans do. When will we have that? Well, it depends on how deep we have to go in modeling human brains. So the brain is very detailed and has lots of structure. We might be able to get away with looking at some higher level structures and modeling that. The small structures might not all matter. If that's true, then we'll be able to model this early, and it won't be as many decades before we can do this. But the deeper we have to dig into the brain, into modeling lower level things, the more computing power we'll need. And so the farther decades in the future it will be till we have cheap enough computers to do that. But all these times are roughly within a century or so. So the forecast is within a century or so. Not this year, not a decade from now, not even 30 years from now, but within a century or so, this looks possible. And if it happens, everything changes. So let's talk about a few implications of having a mass world full of robots. Robots have a number of features that differ from us. One thing is robots are immortal. Just like today, cars and houses are immortal. What? We let cars and houses die, but we don't have to. If we keep repairing cars and houses, they last forever. But they don't actually last forever unless we do keep repairing them. Same for robots. They could last forever, but they might not if you don't keep repairing them. Travel. Robots you can encode in a computer file, and you can send it somewhere electronically, so robots can travel around the world electronically. They can download their brain from their robot body, send it somewhere else, download it to another robot body, and then they can go somewhere else. So it makes long-distance travel cheap and fast. Robots don't care as much about nature as you. They might love nature like you do, but you also fear hurting nature. Why? Because you know that there's a good chance if you kill nature, you will die. But robots built in factories out of machines, they know that they won't die if nature dies. And so whether they save nature is more optional. And that means nature is more at risk. Copies. Robots can be copied exactly, just like you can copy a movie or a music file. And this has enormous implications for a world and an economy of robots. It means you can quickly make many billions, even trillions of them. They can be identical copies. There's implications for trading. But one of the most dramatic implications is it means we become a Malthusian world. A world of robots that can be easily copied is a world where wages fall to the cost of making the machines, which quickly is less than the cost of feeding humans, i.e., wages fall below human subsistence levels. So we'll talk a bit about the implications of that, but that's huge. It also has implications for how the economy grows. So today in the economy, we need both labor and capital to make things. Some of you may know some labor and some capital. How do we grow the economy? Well, we could grow more capital quickly. We can crank out machines in factories, but the problem is diminishing returns. Having one person have lots of machines, they don't get that much more productive because they can't use all those machines at once. We could grow the economy by growing lots of people too, but we don't grow people very fast. We don't grow people fast enough to double the economy every 15 years like it's doing, and the fact that we don't grow people very fast is limiting the growth rate of the world economy. In fact, the way we actually grow the economy today is to make better machines. We improve our tools and machines, and that's how we are able to double the economy every 15 years. But with robots, we can make robots to go with machines, i.e. they can be both the labor and the capital part of the equation, and we can make a lot of them fast. You can crank out robots out of factories just as fast as you can crank out other machines. And that allows the robot economy to grow much faster than our economy grows. In fact, it could plausibly double not every 15 years, but every month or faster. A robot economy could be a very fast-growing economy. Of course, it can't grow that way forever, but our economy can't grow at this rate forever. If you know cosmology, we just can't possibly last 1 billion years doubling every 15. You can't possibly even last 1 million years doubling every month, but it could last for a while and have huge implications. So, emulations are copies of humans. They are psychologically just like the human they were a copy of. That's what it means to be an emulation. They are just have exactly the same tendencies. So they fall in love, they hate, they get mad, they get irrational. They do have all the mental characteristics of humans because they are mentally like human. In fact, you might say they are our descendants. In a world of emulations, you might care more about the emulations than the humans are still around because they are the ones who feel and are capable. And in addition, they are just much better than humans. That is, we take 7 billion people, and we can take the few very best humans, and we can make billions of copies of them. And that's, in fact, what the emulation economy do. The emulation economy is a very competitive one because copies are so easy to make. The firms that are trying to make copies will pick the very best, train them to be the very best. So in a distribution of humans, the emulation characteristics will be often the extreme. They are the best of the best. In fact, by comparison with humans, they are at the billionaire Olympic gold medalist. They are at that level of ability. And they know it. So they may look back on humans with gratitude and nostalgia, but not a lot of respect because they're better. We know a bunch of things about how people who are better are different from other people, and so we can use that to predict how emulations are different from the average human. They're going to be smarter, more conscientious, extroverted, etc., all the way down the line, even more religious, presumably, and they would actually mostly be at a peak age of around 50 or so, because that's when human productivity peaks. So you'll want to train up the emulations until they're at a peak age and then make lots of copies of them at the peak age because you're trying to find the most productive emulations. In our world, luxurious surroundings like we see up here are expensive, but emulations can have virtual reality quite cheaply. As long as they're on a computer, they can be in a virtual reality environment on the computer. And in leisure time, they could have gorgeous environments that are cheap. So it's very cheap to have luxurious environments for an M. But emulations are actually working most of the time because it's a very competitive environment. But most of them have office jobs, just like in advanced economies today, most people have office jobs. So the emulations are actually mostly sitting in very nice looking offices working, like this. So it's a nice life, except it's work. Humans, we told you I'd get back to them. Now, quickly the emulation economy grows to be much larger than the human economy. There become much more emulations than there are humans. Humans are eclipsed. What happens to the eclipsed humans? Well, first of all, as we said, the wages for emulations fall well below human subsistence. So quickly, humanity must retire. Humanity can no longer productively work, unless they want to do it for fun, but that's not where they get their income. However, humanity starts off owning the entire world economy. With time, they own less of it, but they still own a lot. So if the economy doubles every month, your investments double every month. So human retirees, their investments might double every month. So they would quickly get very rich in their retirement and enjoy. But of course, if they don't have any money to start with, growing it doesn't help. So it's important for humans to have some initial wealth in this environment so that they can grow it to be much larger. Many people have described, of course, movies and scenarios because it's dramatic of a robot war. Robots grow up, they take over, and then there's a huge war, right? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. First of all, we could kill all retirees and take their stuff, but we don't. Why? Well, they're not productive, so why don't we? Well, of course, they're integrated into our society, and it would be awkward and difficult to do that, and we don't, for good things. So humans and robots, if they're integrated into the same society, sharing the same institutions of finance and law and governance, then there's no particular reason to expect a war there either. If we look back in time at the transition from farming to industry, we see that, in fact, there was not a war against farmers versus industrialists. There were nations that had both farmers and industry who warred against other nations with both farmers and industry. So there may well be wars in this new world, but it doesn't have to be, it isn't likely to be a war between humans and robots. It would probably be fought along other lines. However, in this new world, things change very fast. So I said the economy might double every month or even faster. So a lot can happen in a few years. So it's hard to give any assurances that the world will be stable for humans. If you say, can I live another 20 years peacefully? And I say, I have no idea, because so much is changing. So all of a sudden, at some point in the next century or so, there'll be this huge transition to a world dominated by robots. Growth rates go up dramatically, humans get displaced, and now there's a world full of robots changing and growing very rapidly. And even though there's no particular reason to expect a war or destruction of humans, there's also not much of a guarantee you can offer because the world is just changing so rapidly. So much is going to be going on. Each of these emulations, as I said, we're going to take the very best humans and we're going to make lots of copies of them. So an emulation will then have many, many siblings who are all copies from the same original person. Say George. So George is a very good lawyer, and there are maybe millions or billions of Georges, and they can talk to each other. So they have very close twins who have very close associations. It's almost as if there's a whole planet of people just like you out there. Some of you may have thought you must have come from another planet because you're not like the people around you, and you just hope there was a whole planet of other people out there like you because you could be friends with them. Well, for emulations, this is true. There is, in fact, a whole planet of other creatures out there just like them. Our lives are simple. This is a timeline. You're born, you die. That's it, straight line. Emulations can have more interesting varieties of lives. For example, this is an emulation who, I don't know, every morning makes a few copies, some of whom go off to the DMV and stand in line or go to a party, whatever they do, but at the end of the day, only one lasts to go on to the next day. This is a more opportunistic emulation who makes different copies when there's demand for them, and whenever there's more demand for those, they spin up more copies of them, and who knows in the future which one is going to have the most demand, but eventually, of course, you run out of demand and there's fewer copies of you left. This is a recursive software engineer, a recursive designer. You make an overall design, you split into copies of each, make sub-designs all the way down to the bottom. Maybe if you're software, you implement it, then you recurse up, and you're done. This is a fun robot plumber, imagine. So every morning, the robot plumber splits into 1,000 plumbing copies, each of whom do a 1 or 2 hour plumbing job. And then all but one are ended and go on to the next day. In history, this guy remembers only ever working 1 or 2 hours a day. So he has a memory of a life of leisure. However, in fact, 99% of his time has actually been spent working. So emulations can work a lot, but still remember mostly a life of leisure. Emulations can run at different speeds, and the one speed will, of course, be running at human speeds, and that would be the initial speed they would run at because they would be working mostly with humans. But after a while, you could have runs that run faster, and it turns out that to have a body you can control that matches your mind speed, you want it to be proportionally smaller. So if you're running 16 times faster, you want to be 16 times shorter, and so on up the speed hierarchy. And it's actually plausible to have emulations that are 1,000,000 times faster than humans, but they cost 1,000,000 times as much too. So there's a cost proportional to speed here, so there's a choice of what the optimal speed is. Retirees can go slower, and so in fact, there's a class hierarchy here because higher speed M's have many signatures of being higher class, of being more respected, of having more resources, of knowing more things. And we expect the speeds to clumps because it makes sense to interact with others at the same speed. So in fact, emulations have a class hierarchy, a set of distinct classes where the higher ones are more respected than the lower ones. And this class hierarchy can go on in the other direction because retirement is cheap for emulations because they can retire slow. So you need to retire at the same speed that you're living, and so you need to save a lot for retirement. But emulations, if they retire slow, they can go very, very slow, and they can get very, very cheap. In our world, we have cities, of course, you're in one, and cities have many advantages, but they also have some disadvantages. A disadvantage to a city is that they have more traffic congestion, that it takes time to get around cities. Emulations, they can travel across the city in virtual reality. So their brains can stay where they are, and they just send a few bits that represent the room they're in and what they're saying. And that makes travel much cheaper for emulations. And that means emulations can not pay the travel congestion costs, and they can have, therefore, huge dense cities. So in fact, emulations would congregate on a very small number of dense cities. Most of the world, the Earth would still be left to humans because the emulations wouldn't be interested. They would be focused on a few very small, very dense cities where billions or trillions of emulations would congregate together. Well, as I've said, I have a whole book full of details here. And I can go on, of course, more, but I think my time is up, so I thank you. And again, you don't have to worry about this now, a century or more. For the next few decades, business as usual, don't worry about it.